Very honored to be here to discuss this very important issue with everybody today. If there is one thing that you remember from today's presentations, I hope it's that you remember this.
This video shows a rupture of a buried, dense phase carbon dioxide pipeline. The experiment was conducted in the safe environment of the DNVGL Spade Adam Testing and Research Centre to assess the consequences of such ruptures in terms of mass outflow, crater formation and dense gas dispersion. The viewer should note that the extent of the visible plume does not necessarily represent the extent of the dense gas hazard.
I have now seen this video probably dozens of times. This is a test rupture of an 8-inch pipeline of a CO2 pipeline. When I watch this video, I think about my home in Louisiana, which is another part of the United States where regulators and companies are talking about bringing these CO2 pipelines close to where people live. And this is all done as part of, as you know, the nation's efforts to move toward a system of carbon capture and storage. But what is carbon capture and storage? I'm sure that you have heard a lot about this before. Carbon capture and storage, of course, is the theory that carbon emissions from coal and gas-fired power plants or other industrial polluting facilities can be captured before they're released into the atmosphere and then can be stored underground indefinitely, or more often used to get more oil and gas out of the ground through what is called enhanced oil recovery. You might actually recognize carbon capture and storage by another marketing moniker that it had for decades, which is clean coal. This is not a new technology. It's something that the oil, gas, and coal industries have been proposing and working to get public money for many decades. And after decades of research and experimental application into some form of carbon capture, the flagship projects for this technology have failed in the last few years because carbon capture is just not feasible or economical. Billions of dollars of the public's money have been spent, and it is still not working. Less than 0.1%, less than 0.10% of carbon emissions are being captured right now, and feasibly less than 8% of carbon emissions could even be captured if carbon capture and storage is built out in the way that the industry is pushing for. We're talking about potentially trillions of dollars of public money for less than 10% of a solution that endangers communities. And that's if this technology even works. Some project proponents are proposing carbon capture and storage plans which would affect Minnesota, including a system of pipelines. And that actually includes potentially the largest carbon capture and storage project in the world that would cost billions of dollars with the capacity to capture 8 to 12 million tons of CO2 per year. That sounds like a lot, millions of tons, but to put that number in perspective, that's only about 1/10 of Minnesota's annual emissions. And it's a drop in the bucket compared to the global CO2 emissions annually, which are 36.4 billion tons. That's a lot. And what we're talking about is the largest CCS project in the world to address a tiny portion of those emissions. Proponents of carbon capture and storage actually envision a massive new network of CO2 pipelines across the country to transport this dangerous asphyxiant for either enhanced oil recovery in otherwise depleted wells or for storage largely in underground saline aquifers. At present in the United States, there are about 5,000 miles of CO2 pipelines, mostly concentrated in the gas and oil fields of West Texas and mostly used for EOR. And CCS proponents imagine expanding that to 25,000 miles by 2050 and shifting from remote fields to heavily populated areas throughout the country, including Minnesota. And at this point, I'm actually going to hand it over to my colleague June, who is going to talk about the differences between carbon capture and direct air capture technology, and how both of them actually require the transportation of CO2 from the capture site to the injection site via pipelines.